So again, welcome. Thank you, everybody. Just now that the recording is on, I'll do a welcome again. I'm Marcy from Sociate. I run our marketing and outreach, and we're super excited for our discussion with Roman today. Before we really get into it, I'm going to kind of turn things over to Randeep, the Sociate founder, just to kick things off, and then we'll get into it. And one thing I will mention, and I'll put it in the chat as well, we do have our own set of prepared questions that we like to start off with, but these sessions are best when you guys ask your questions, and that's what we're here for, is to answer your questions and to make this interactive and interesting for you. I think we'll try to have people add their questions to the chat first, and I'll try to moderate them from there. But yes, do not be shy. Thank you so much, and over to you, Randy.
Thanks, Marcy. Well, welcome everyone. Second edition for this year, 2022. Today we have Roman Pedan. He's the CEO and founder of Kasa Living. So very excited to have you, Roman, on this call with so many of our MBA students. So welcome to Sociate Q&A.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Cool. So Marcy, as everyone just heard, for those joining, Marcy has a set up prepared a list of questions, but then we'll open it up to Q&A. So hopefully everyone is going to stick around, add their questions to the chat box, and maybe more of your friends are going to join soon. So thank you, everyone. Marcy, why don't you go get started?
Yeah, absolutely. So keep it simple. We always start everything off with the same question every time for all of our sessions. I think first and foremost, everybody would love to know just a little bit more about you. So, if you could give a brief introduction on yourself, personal, career, school, you name it, whatever you'd like to share with us. We would just love to get to know you a little better.
Yeah. So I was born in Ukraine, which I know is where we're all hoping the situation there gets better. I feel especially lucky to have grown up in the U.S. So my family came over when I was 2, and I grew up in Boston. I also actually feel quite lucky to be able to build Kasa. It kind of intersects what I am passionate about, what I have experience in, and what I think creates value. It's the intersection of real estate, hospitality, and travel and technology. I learned how to code when I was very little, and actually was that when I was 5. I got like a QBasic book, and then graduated to Visual Basic and Java and C, and studied it in undergrad. I always loved travel and real estate, partially because I never got a chance to, or not as much as I would have hoped growing up. My family was trying to make it in the US, and we didn't go in as my family went on trips when it was off season, which meant I was in school. And I studied real estate in undergrad. I was fortunate to have two goes at a business degree. I went to undergrad at Penn. I studied within the Wharton School and studied real estate and finance, and I studied technology, or I studied computer science within the engineering school. And so had the opportunity to combine what I loved into what I studied. I then worked for a while. I started a company in undergrad called Bookly. We were the kayak.com of textbooks, sold about $15 million worth of textbooks to students. We didn't hold inventory. We were the intermediary, took a percentage of every sale, and saved folks a lot of money. Realized I wasn't gonna do textbook. I wasn't really passionate about textbooks long term, and went into real estate private equity. Was one of the early team members at KKR's real estate team. Helped grow that from 6 to I think 60 by the time I left. And I started Kasa. Coming out of that, we were investing in hotels. We bought a few $1 billion worth of hotels across the U.S. And we were investing globally. And it was interesting. We were investing in hotels, and I was staying in Airbnbs. And there was this cognitive dissonance that was growing, that the future of hospitality and travel looked different than the old world. But the new world of Airbnb was missing something really key, which was reliability. Sometimes you have a really great experience on Airbnb. Sometimes it can be a tougher experience because the host on the other end is a non-professional host, and so there's an opportunity to offer something different, and that's the genesis for Kasa.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. And see, even though we had a prep call, I don't think we even talked about Bookly in our prep call. So I love hearing kind of the backstory and everything that you did leading up to this. I would say, next I would love to at least just cover a little bit more. If you could tell us a little bit more about Kasa Living. So kind of who are your typical customers? What type of rental services and accommodations do you offer? I know you mentioned hotel, but from our discussion, I know you have an array of products and services, and you have quite a cross section of different customers.
Yeah, so Kasa has locations across 45 cities, over 75 buildings, and we're growing every month. What we're building for the consumer is a global accommodations brand for the modern traveler, which for the consumer, which is our guest, that means we combine the best of Airbnb and hotels. So the things I love about Airbnb and continue to love is the wide selection of locations they offer, the sensible prices, but it can be sometimes tough when you don't know what you're going to expect for certain types of trips. And so we combine that selection of locations and sensible prices with the reliability of a brand. So it's kind of like if Airbnb and Marriott had a love child, that's Kasa would be that love child. And we're seeking with our accommodations product to reach an independent tech forward traveler who's looking for a self-directed, digitally native experience. They check in on their phone, they text with us to get what they need. And we kind of call it hospitality that's rarely seen, but always felt. There's no front desk. You're not waiting in line. You go straight to your room. And if you need us, we're just a text away. So that's the guest side. For the owner, we deliver more income to our partners with less risk. And we do that across, as you mentioned, multiple different types of properties. So we have partners who own apartment buildings, and we have a floor or two within that apartment building that we operate and license as a shorter stay accommodation. We have hotels, typically smaller hotels, anywhere between 10 rooms and a little over 100 rooms that we operate fully as short stay accommodations, and we have townhomes as well. But across all of those, we use the same approach. So our partners are typically really large owners who own a large portfolio of properties. Think Morgan Stanley, think Starwood Capital, many others like them. Usually we operate at a low scale, meaning a low number of units per property, and in a very distributed manner, right? We're in 45 cities, we're in 75 plus buildings. A little more technical, we usually operate in what's called an asset light agreement, where we take a fee for our services rather than signing a lease. And then lastly, and maybe most importantly, we use the same technology to operate across all of those. The technology makes us able to deliver a reliable experience without as much staff on site at a very low scale across many properties. And we've built that primarily in-house, and that's what gives us a great advantage.
That's awesome. Again, I'm truly impressed by kind of the breadth and depth of your portfolio and your offerings already in such what I would call like a reasonably short period of time. One thing I realized that we didn't ask you kind of up front is if you could just kind of, for context, just talk about how long you've been in operation, perhaps like where you are in your fundraising and all of that, because I know there's been a lot of articles about it and some people may have seen little tidbits here and there, but it would be helpful, I think, for context of the meeting to hear a little bit more kind of about where you are in your journey.
Yeah, for sure. So there's a couple of maybe two distinct founding moments. The first, that was between my first and second year at Stanford's GSB. And that was when we got the first Kasa units on the platform, about August 2016. So a little over 5 years ago. That next year, and when I say we, really, I and one or two contractors and a housekeeping partner operated about 18 Kasa units. It started with 4 and then expanded to 18. And literally calls would come to my cell phone and I'd leave class, whether that be Touchy Feely, a famous Stanford class, or another, and help a guest get into their room, which was a lot of fun, but also stressful when my phone was on loud overnight and we needed to solve emergencies with very limited resources. That's the first moment Kasa came to existence. The other founding moment is when maybe there are 3. The other is when we hired our first full-time team member, and that was after I graduated in June 2017. And then we raised capital in December 2018. We raised our seed round. We raised 6.3 million from a great partner in Zig Capital, who's a real estate focused venture fund. They've been tremendous partners, from Box Group, who's really well known in investing in really strong brands, and Founder Collective, who've had a lot of success investing in businesses that have both a technology component and operations component. Famously, they were the first check and Uber, and many others. And so that was our seed. We've since raised. We've had our Series A and B. We closed our Series B in the hardest time for our business, which was the pandemic, in August 2020, with Ribbit Capital leading that round. And collectively, we raised, I think, $56 million. We measure our progress not in money raised, but in how many guests we serve, how many 5-star stays we deliver. But it's obviously good to have validation from really elite partners who've been really helpful along the way. We have about 265 people at Kasa, spread all over the world, because our properties are all over the world. And we were remote first before COVID-19. And so we've actually continued and felt very well prepared for what was a shock from a way people work perspective. We've been remote for quite some time.
Yes, that is true. And you actually, it's almost as if you know the order. Well, you do, because I shared the document with you. But the order of the questions I want to ask, because I know one of them we always like to hit upon, and you started to touch upon it already, about how the pandemic has either affected, whether it be accelerated or just a general impact on your business model and growth. And I know you kind of have a story about that, about how you guys grew and struggled and ultimately succeeded through the pandemic. So I was hoping you could just go into a little bit more detail about that too, because it's a great part of your story.
Yeah, and I should clarify what I said. We're remote first. We have an office here in New York City. That's where I'm sitting, and we have an office in San Francisco, and actually one in Budapest, where some of our tech team sits, and some of our tech team is in San Francisco. So we're hybrid, remote, and excited to continue in that way. COVID was extremely stressful, I'm sure, for everyone. And we felt like we were in the eye of the hurricane and the center of the bullseye. I call it almost the darkest hour for the business. Our revenue dropped in March of 2020 into April 2020 by something like 70%. Our occupancy was in free fall. We actually were just hot off raising a Series A, feeling invincible, having lots of runway, and all of a sudden we went from a fully funded business plan to only a few months of runway and an uncertain future, which meant that I think early stage companies are always, there's like the old analogy, wartime versus peacetime. There's always a need to really intensely execute and really effectively execute. We were in intense wartime, and in terms of what that means for a young company. And we needed to get a lot of things right in a short period of time to have a chance. And I couldn't be prouder of the team, which now feels battle tested, which in a 2-month period went from defense to offense. We worked with our partners to adjust our agreements in order to make them more future proof. We worked on marketing to longer stays and essential workers, hosting folks from traveling nurses to people who were in need of medical care to just people stranded internationally and not able to make it home. And that stabilized our occupancy. We worked in the capital markets and raised actually a debt facility at a moment when it was difficult to access any capital. And then once we stopped playing defense, we were able to play a little offense, and we were able to help owners who were coming to us because other companies in the space, in the sector, were not on as sturdy footing. They were coming to us for help, and we started operating where many other companies were leaving units empty for our partners. And that helped us grow, actually, when the industry, we ended up growing by 50% in a period of time when the industry cratered by 60%. And so that was a really meaningful moment. And then that's what catalyzed the Series B, where all of a sudden we went from being the 7th or 8th biggest in the sector, all of a sudden to being the 2nd, and very clearly could convey how we'd become the largest. And I think you kind of said all the successes have been certainly really, we're really proud of them, but I really think we're still at day zero. Like we have built a lot, and I think the clear path ahead of us is one we're excited by, but we have so much more to do in the future than we've accomplished in the last few years.
I do remember you referring to it as day zero when I talked about all the success I felt like you had already achieved, and you said, no, we're at day zero in our minds. And that definitely stuck with me from our earlier conversation. So I'm going to ask one more question up from our prepared list, and we can pop back to it later, and then we'll get to Vessa's question. I hope other people won't be shy. I know everybody always is at first, but I do want to ask one more question, which I think will clarify some things for some people, because I know this was something that I was unclear of before we first spoke, and that was kind of who you consider your primary competitors and your partners, because I think I and Randeep also, we just kind of assumed, oh, Airbnb must be one of your primary competitors, and you had some interesting thoughts there about who you consider competitors, if anybody, and who you consider a partner.
Yeah, we have maybe I'll start with partner. We have quite a symbiotic relationship with Airbnb. They're a terrific marketplace that offers a wide selection of supply, as I said, and sometimes that supply is Kasa. We're on Airbnb. Sometimes it's an individual host. I think we deliver for them high quality supply. We take pride in delivering what we hope is always a really strong guest experience. We're always working tirelessly to ensure that it gets better and better over time. And they deliver to us really great demand for people who are expecting an experience that's digitally native and often the exact type of experience, right? Hospitality that's rarely seen but always felt that we offer. And so we're great partners with Airbnb and actually other companies like them. Expedia is a bit different, but rhymes with Airbnb, same with Booking.com. They're all platforms through which we access travelers who are looking for an experience like Kasa offers. I think when I think about competitors, I think about it in terms of different places that we compete with us. Like they're usually substitutes for something, substitutes for supply, substitutes for demand. Maybe we're competing for talent, maybe it's capital. And so it's not like a one and all-encompassing answer here. It depends on in what lens we're talking about. For demand, people who stay with us often are considering not traveling. So we compete with not traveling often there. So that's non-consumption. They sometimes consider, depending on the trip type, a Marriott or a boutique hotel. And sometimes it's an individual home on Airbnb or staying with their friends. And so none of those are like the biggest share of what others consider relative to their Kasa choice. But I think all of those are in the consideration set. Very small percentage of people consider us against a company that looks like us. There's only a couple. One of those is called Sonder. They SPAC'd. We have a guest survey. We ask people, what else did you consider? Sonder does not come up as a frequent answer, often because our markets are different and the type of properties within those markets are different. And we're both relatively small compared to the entire industry. And other companies like them similarly rarely come up. On the supply side, the answer is kind of similar. Often we're competing against, again, non-consumption, right? The owner of the hotel we might partner with would have otherwise run it themselves, meaning they wouldn't have consumed a professional brand or manager otherwise. Or an apartment owner may have not had short stays within their apartment. So that's probably our biggest competition, which is like in some ways a phantom competition, but in other ways very exciting, because we believe the macro trends are really strong that non-consumption, when there's a product, because there's a pain, will turn into consumption. But then in a very narrow sense, we do compete sometimes with companies like Sonder and a couple of others, but very rarely. So the majority, it's like the vast majority is non-consumption if we look at our supply pipeline. And then in a few cases, it's with a few other companies. And the reason why that's the case is we target a very different type of owner and a very different type of partner. And then team, the most important thing for us by far is the team that we attract. And we compete against, it's a very tough market the bar is very high, as it should be for employers. And we compete against the global marketplace when it comes to attracting great talent.
Thank you. That was a super comprehensive answer, and I think sheds a lot of light on, how you view yourself within the market. And I think I would agree with you that based on how you've described it to me today and in our previous call, I wouldn't say it does make sense how you say there's not really any, true one-to-one competition. Although when you said Sandra, that did ring a bell in my head, something I had seen once somewhere and forgot about. But you really are extended the variety of your partner network is very impressive. But I guess before I get to some more of my questions on my list, I want to, again, thank Bess, who was brave enough to ask our first question. Bess, it's up to you if you'd like to come off mute or not. I can certainly ask the question for you, but feel free to come off mute and ask Roman directly if you'd like.
Yeah, hi, Roman. Nice meeting you. My question is about Kasa Living's future plan for the next 1 to 3 years. I wonder if there are any key business areas or any key geographies that you want to expand into, and what are the reasons behind? Thank you.
Yeah, so that's a great question. As a company whose ambition is to build a global accommodations brand, we have to grow tremendously from where we are today. And so growth is fundamental to that mission. We also have to deliver great experiences to our guests and to our property partners and neighbors, kind of our three outside core stakeholders. So our top goals that affect most of the company are the quality of stays that we deliver. And so a lot of work, and we measure that it kind of relentlessly across a lot of different dimensions, breaking it down across cleaning and check-in and other areas. And we kind of have a top level metric in terms of quality stays based on the number of percentage of 5-star stays we have relative to the 1 through 3-star stays. The work to improve that metric is across technology, across operations, across our guest experience team, and that will pervade all of our growth and kind of be a forever goal for the company. In terms of unit growth for Kasa, we think we've kind of been doubling to tripling every year in the past, and we think that's the likely pace for some time, and eventually it obviously will. It should, as the world is finite, level off, but we're so small that there's a long runway to continue increasing our number of units on the platform, and so that's the goal for the next couple of years. Our first priority, we're in 45 cities, is to expand in terms of geos within the cities that we're already in, because there's a lot of untapped inventory within those cities, and to stay in the United States, because again, we could grow 100x just in the United States. That being said, and then there's 3 different types of products we offer: the townhomes, the apartments. We call them Kasa. We call them different styles of Kasas. So apartment style Kasas, hotel style Kasas, and home style Kasas. And we expect to grow fairly evenly across the 3, although there's a little bit of supply demand dynamics that impact us. If one of those areas has a bigger need for us, we'll probably grow a bit faster in that area than another, and that applies to all 3. And then we are building a global accommodations brand, so we do hope to be overseas, and think the opportunity is actually in many countries larger than it is in the US. As an example, the US hotel market is 3/4 branded, meaning Marriott and Hilton and Hyatt. They take up about 3/4 and all the other brands of the hotel rooms. And so the remaining quarter of the hotel market are unbranded, independently managed hotels. Those are the only ones that are our target. We're not focused at all on branded properties. The interesting thing about Europe is it's the inverse. 3/4 of hotels are independent, small, family run or independently run properties, and only 1/4 are branded. which means that's actually the bigger opportunity than the US opportunity. But the good news within the US is that 1/4 of the market is still really big relative to our current size. So we have a lot of work to do to focus and expand within it. And then over time, we do expect to go global. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah, that is. Yeah, thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. And we had one more brave soul so far. So Harina, feel free to ask your question to Roman directly in case he can't see the chat.
Hey, Roman. So just a little question outside of the Kasa Living aspect. So you mentioned you've done a few startups in your professional life. What are some tips you have for startup teams that are just like starting out with their business? And then some ways those teams should reevaluate their strategy when they've like gained a little traction in the market, so they can be like as big as they want to be.
Yeah, great question. The most important, from my perspective, thing early on is knowing if the world needs your product. And the world is a broad place, so it's really who needs your product, figuring out what for which group in the world you solve a really big pain that they can't live without solving, and so they go to in like seek you out to the end of the earth to find you. And the best way and that's a very hard thing. And actually, stepping a little bit back, the way that I thought about things early on with Kasa, and I think applies to other companies, is what are the questions that if they are not answered in the affirmative, maybe, then this company won't be able to grow to its potential. So what are like the key unanswered questions, the key opportunities or the key risks that if I answer them yes, then this could be a huge idea. And if I answer them no, then the idea has no legs. Knowing those is really important. Most often, the biggest question is, do people need this product? So that's why I started with that. The key is to know those, try to understand those questions, always ask that set of like simple questions to yourself. What needs to be true for this to be big? And then answer the ones that you can answer, the hardest ones or the riskiest ones as early as possible, and ideally with as little money as possible. And typically the hardest question is people call it colloquially, like, are the dogs eating the dog food? Like, will people use your product? And typically the real question is, who has the pain that your product is solving? And sometimes the question actually is, you know the who, but you don't know the pain. And so you need to talk to the target market. That's hopefully a relatively small group of people that have a lot in common with each other, and talk to them and ask them why they came to you. Maybe you like have a product and a group of people that you didn't expect keep asking for the product. And then the morsel of insight might be, you thought you were solving one pain, but you might be solving another. So that's maybe a little theoretical, and the hard part is actually doing it. But my recommendation is the instinct sometimes is to not focus on these existential issues because they're scary. Because if they are answered, the answers are no, then you might not be spending your time as wisely, because there might not be a great future. But your time is really valuable. So the scarier thing is spending your time in the wrong way. And maybe through the process of answering those like scary to answer questions, you actually find the path that makes the most sense for what you're building.
Wonderful.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And so until we get some more questions in, Anne. Oh, perfect. Anne raised her hand. I was just going to say, please feel free to raise your hand. And so Anne, go for it. Ask your question.
Hi, Roman. Thank you so much for sharing with us. I have a question. I really like your answer previously. You have really customer-centric approach when you build your strategy of a company. I'm curious, like after you have defined that and you have a MVP or products that are available, how did you manage to gain the first momentum from the market, gain your first seed users and how you grow from seed users to, scalable growth. Curious, like any tips or advice you would share with us in terms of that? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So for us, again, there's the supply, the building owners, and then there's the demand. The demand has always been the lesser constraint for us. When we found our first locations, we put them on Airbnb and Expedia and Booking.com, and they were basically full right off the bat. So we knew they were solving a really big need for guests. And so the bigger constraint for us was the supply, the owners of the properties. And I remember I have a background in real estate, and so thought this is going to be easy. I speak the language of our partners. I know a lot of folks who own portfolios of properties really well, and so I'll be able to convince them. And actually, it was really difficult at the start, especially without any proof points or much credibility, to convince the first owner to let us run a small hotel in their apartment building. We had to work on the language, for example. We don't view it as a small hotel in the apartment building today, but that was the language we were using, not knowing the customer well enough to explain it in the way that that would resonate, and the way that in practice our product would activate in their properties. And so we had to get the simple answers. We had a lot of no's. We went out and we pounded the pavement. We cold emailed everyone we knew. We used our network to try to get the first partner working with us. We went in person and knocked on apartment buildings, leasing offices, and asked them. And it took a lot of no's. And then when we got the first yes, we moved mountains and ran through walls to get those first units up and running. The first partner for us was this owner called Prometheus, which is a large West Coast apartment owner. They told us they would give us 4 apartments, but we needed to move really quickly. On a Tuesday, they gave us the green light. By Thursday, we needed to have them furnished. And that meant we made a mad dash to buy furniture, maxed out a few credit cards, slept on the floor of the apartments to get them up and running. And it was like if we thought if we didn't do that, we wouldn't have our first partners. And if we didn't have, our hypothesis. So our hypothesis was if you have the first partner, it helps get the second partner on board. And so do a lot of things that don't scale for that first one in order to build the credibility, social proof, and understanding. And through the process of getting no's, we learned, and through the process of getting yeses, we learned. The no's told us why, we pushed why. The yeses also gave us a sense of why they wanted to work with us. And so that was kind of like customer interviews in the heat of battle. And then we answered, kind of going back to my answer to the previous question, a key question: will owners work with us? Sort of, because one owner is willing to work with us. And then we needed to understand whether this was actually going to scale or not. So the first customers for us on the non-consumer side was kind of doing a lot of things that don't scale, learning as much as possible about our customer to hone our message and the pain point we're solving, and then running through walls to try to get the first partnership off the ground. And a little bit of luck, I'm sure, had something to do with it as well.
Thank you. Thank you for your sharing. This is, I think being an entrepreneur, it's really challenging in a sense that taking a lot of notes in the beginning of the startup. I really appreciate that you're sharing that with us.
Yeah, it feels like they're saying no to your dream. So it can be hard, but also it's part of the journey. And the hard part is you don't know early on. And this is the kind of thing that you don't hear in most, I think, interviews that I've seen, but you don't know early on whether the no means this is a bad idea or the no means it's too early for the partner. They're not an early adopter, or it's not a bad. Then that's the tricky part, which makes every no feel very scary.
That's a great point. Yeah. I mean, you face that in most startups, right? What does that no mean, right? And I think it's a kind of getting that clarity, right? To be so
For sure. For sure.
I think along those lines, and I'll kind of pop back into my questions until we get a couple more great souls to ask them some of their own questions here, which goes along nicely with what you started talking about. I know you, one of our questions earlier had asked about, what's some general advice that you would give to people who are looking to build their own startups. And I had on my list, well, one, what are some of the questions that a founder should be asking themselves? You made it very clear, the number one question, or it seems like the number one question you felt like you have to ask yourself is, who needs your product? Like, are there actually people that will buy it or consume it? But I was hoping maybe you could share a couple more. I think in our prep call, you may have shared a few different questions of things that people should ask of themselves. And then I'll kind of ask the second part of the question after that.
Yeah, and ask of themselves. I think the answer depends on the stage of the business, and I think the framework that maybe the simplest framework is the same one that I shared in the previous answer, which is what's the biggest risk that if we don't reduce the risk, the business is less likely to succeed. What's the biggest question that if we don't answer in the affirmative, there's not as clear of a path? And what's the biggest opportunity? And trying to it's not a straight line, but at least you can organize your strategy by having those questions and then knowing where you stand. Maybe it's a simple red, yellow, green for those questions along the way is really important for us. And where we are in the journey, one of the most important things, I think we have a very clear sense of what we want to be in the future, what our mission and vision is. We have our vision is why we're doing this. It's to unleash the potential of livable space. It's to use space more effectively. Our mission is to build that global accommodations brand for the modern traveler. We have a clear sense of how we make decisions along the way, our values, and we have a clear sense of our strategy to deliver professional hospitality to underserved owners who lack great options for professional hospitality. And we know the key metrics along the way, kind of if we're hitting our growth goals, if we're hitting our quality goals with our guests, and if we're delivering strong unit economics while doing so, we're much more likely to succeed in the long run. And so the question that I try to prioritize my time on which of those goals that are milestones along the way are most at risk, which ones I can influence most. And knowing I have finite time every hour at Kasa, there's 265 other hours that our team is, or 264 that our team is spending. What can I do that makes everyone a little bit better? What are really high leverage things that I can work on, or what are maybe things that only I can do that others aren't as equipped, that can have outsized impact on those milestones that we're trying to hit along the way? So that's where we are, but maybe what you need to figure out is the strategy first, the like key morsel of truth that you're answering, and then focus all your attention on that. Where I focus my attention is the team, because I think attracting the next set of really talented people gives us an unfair advantage in executing on our strategy and our long-term mission and vision. And I also spend time in capital markets, right? Making sure we have the right partners and the right resources in order to execute on what we're building.
Wonderful. I actually am going to skip the second part of my question for a moment, just because you mentioned it twice in your previous answer. You talked about the team and the importance of the team and building the team and how that gives you an advantage. So something I have to kind of throw out there, which I think I mentioned to you in our prep call, is I would love to know kind of where you're looking to hire kind of in the near to medium future, near term to medium term. Does any of that kind of involve any MBA hires, or just kind of where do you see the need arising in the next, let's say, several months?
Yeah, so Kasa is this, I think, quite unusual combination of technology talent, hospitality and operations talent, and real estate talent. Our real estate team alone could be a private equity real estate team. We have really talented folks who were senior executives at private equity teams. Our technology team could be a standalone just technology team, and our ops team is and hospitality team is best in class as well. And so the thing that makes Kasa special is this marriage among industries that typically are siloed, and the ability to work cross-functionally with some of the smartest people at their craft who are really passionate about the potential of transforming an industry that has for a long time been fairly staid, and in this moment clearly needs an innovator to come in and bring a product that guests demand. And so one thing I'll say, that's the pitch on why Kasa is great. I also should say we're an early stage company with big growth ambitions, and while it's fun and invigorating to work on a big idea, it's also hard. And we're not like the bar is very high for myself. The bar is high for everyone at the company, and we by virtue of having this amazing chance to build a global brand that defines an accommodations category, we know the bar and expectations set by ourselves are very high. And the other thing is the many young companies do not succeed. And I think anyone joining a young company should be doing it because they're passionate about what they're building and want it to exist in the world and can feel good that if the company doesn't make it, they'll have contributed to a cause they believe in and have learned a lot along the way. So both the reason to do it and the reasons not to do it. The roles we have available, we have a need for GMs across different markets. We have a need for ops and marketing folks. We're building a brand. We're operating hospitality in a very different way without as much staff on site. And we have a need for real estate folks who help us grow. We grow by partnering with folks to buy properties. Sometimes we're very intimately partnered in that purchase, though Kasa itself does not, the operating company does not purchase. We are very intimately partnered with them. And often we also partner with owners who own the properties, and Kasa is a full third party. We also need some folks in biz ops, and there's an exciting opening for chief of staff, or hopefully exciting opening for chief of staff to myself as well. So those are a few available roles.
Fantastic. And Ellen just raised her hand. So hi, Ellen. Feel free to ask your question of Roman.
Hey, thanks so much, Roman. Thanks for talking to all of us. This is great. So I am, I'm working on we're building a home maintenance platform, and we're in very early stages. And so I am very curious to hear a little bit about your MVP and what it looked like when you first launched it, and what were kind of the biggest learnings at that point, just because that's where we are. I'm always curious to hear about where companies were.
Yeah, it's a great question. An MVP for those who don't know, it's the minimum viable product. It's like the product that has just enough features that people will still use it, but doesn't require so much build that it costs too much or takes too much time to create it. And it's really important. It's an art, not a science, on what to include and what not to include when creating the MVP. For Kasa, it's a little bit different and difficult. Maybe not an analogy that translates to many industries. We literally need to furnish apartments. So our MVP was quite expensive. Every apartment costs, a 2-bedroom costs $5,000 to $10,000 to furnish, even if you're doing it on the smallest budget. And so when we partnered with our first buildings, we needed to furnish. We basically furnished the units in as sparse, and if you look at the design of the initial units, you can tell, like, a sparse way as possible. We're trying to answer the questions with the MVP. One, will people like staying in these properties? And so furnishing as sparsely as possible was like the least luxury version of Kasa, kind of the minimum viable apartment furnishing package. And then we waited to see what people asked about and learned very quickly what they cared about more, and then added in. We kind of built like a zero-base apartment apartment by virtue of getting questions from people often and noticing through those questions what we should add and what we didn't need to add. And most of the things we got questions about were obvious, but there were a few things that were less obvious. And then on this ownership side, we needed that first set of units was an important reference for us for future units. So the MVP was the same, but it was like the version of our agreement that we signed maybe was like an email exchange with the owner where we had like 3 bullets that overrode the original agreement, rather than now we have a custom agreement we negotiate And we knew the MVP version was just a test to see if they'd agree to anything above their initial agreement. But the future version was maybe a bit more robust. Hopefully that helps. It doesn't apply to many to every industry, but maybe there's some morsels in there that are useful.
No, it's awesome because I think most people talk about MVP as like the first tech build or the first version of their platform, and yours was just like literally how we got the apartments off the ground. So that's cool.
Yep, we did have a tech version of it as well, but very different. And it was like we knew there was something that owners needed for us to really be able to sell to more of them. And the thing for us was trust and safety. Owners really care that we're keeping the integrity of the apartment community intact. And so we built this flow that ensured that every guest that stayed at Kasa was vetted in the same way that every community resident was vetted. And the first version of it was the simplest form. And now we have quite a robust version of that. The reason we built that was we found out through conversations with owners that was their number one reason to say no, not having something like it. And so we needed to figure out what version of it would overcome that objection, and built the very simplest one as they kind of dictated we needed to.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much, Ellen. And I have one or two more questions that I'm planning to ask, but we still also, if anybody wants to ask any final questions as well, just raise your hand. I'll call on you. I'll redirect from my questions. So what I do want to get back to was the second part of the question I had planned to ask earlier. During our prep call, we had kind of talked about, and you said you liked this. I told you how one of our previous guest speakers spent a lot of time, like a very large portion of the time, talking about all the lessons learned and the things that didn't go well. And even though that's not normally what somebody might come to the table for a talk about themselves and their company, like I think we all agreed, like that was very admirable. And not only that, and brave, but the audience really enjoyed that. Like people want to learn from other people's mistakes, right? I mean, to put it bluntly. So I was hoping that you could share maybe a few of the lessons learned that you have. I mean, obviously you mentioned the whole, you need to expect way more no's than you think you're going to get and have a thicker skin, but I'm sure there's several more examples that you could give here of lessons learned that you'd like to impart on the group as we get close to wrapping up.
Yeah, and I don't want to pretend like I'm a bastion of wisdom. I'm still seeking wisdom. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and part of the journey is learning those lessons. There's probably a whole set of categories I can go into, right? With the team, the lessons learned with the team come to mind most. And for me, I think the hardest thing actually is realizing that as the company changes and grows, it's important to adjust the folks who are on the team more quickly than is your instinct. So we probably, and that usually means, the company might change, it might grow 10x, and the person who was in one role that was leading a team of 2 is now leading a team of 40, and that they don't always scale effectively, and it's very painful for both parties if you don't proactively bring that up and find a role within the organization that still is like is a fast expansion of the role that person started with, but maybe more appropriate. Most people don't grow at 10x in a year, right? So it's a little natural for there to be an outpacing of the company and their capability. And I think it's probably common, but certainly something I continue to need to improve on, and was a lesson learned, is not making those adjustments, not identifying the moment you start thinking it might be an issue is probably 2 months after it was an issue, is the realization. But that's actually, for me, the moment when I started monitoring it and started thinking 30 days from now, I'll see how things are going, and then 60 days from now, and really it should have been 60 days in the past. And at a company that a lot of people depend on us, our team, our partners, our guests, it's really important that on their behalf, we're putting the right people in the right positions to give them a better chance of success. And so to me, that whether it's parting ways with someone who isn't performing or finding a different opportunity, it's it certainly doesn't feel good for either person, but long term, it's better for the company, for the stakeholders that you serve, and for the folks that the specific people that are involved. So that's one whole set of things we lessons learned. I think the other is around focus. I think this is going to be a continuous thing that I need to work on, and probably a common and easier to talk about lesson, and harder to know exactly when you should be learning it. And what I mean by focus is it's easy to get attracted to doing a lot of things, and saying yes maybe to things that distract the company from its core purpose, as well as growing in a way that is short-term good and long-term bad. The company has a value that we're on our 100-year journey. That's the value. The value is our 100-year journey, and it reminds us that we should take a long-term oriented view on everything that we do. And the reason we chose 100 years is because that's what it takes to, for the next generation. We're building things for the next generation, almost like when you have a kid, you want to make sure you nurture them for the next, so that they're around for the next generation. And like that's I think a level of care that you only give to like the things you care about most. And that's kind of how we want to think about Kasa. And I say kind of like no junk food, or like no extra TV. Like don't do things that are easier today, but are what much worse in the future. And one of the easiest things that are good today is bad growth, where you're adding growth for growth's sake. It's maybe a bad property, maybe it's a bad deal. And it's really alluring because the capital markets might say, do it. They don't know the difference maybe between good and bad growth. But future Kasa 10 years from now will feel a lot sicker because of the junk food it ate today. And so that's a lesson that we need to continue to think about and learn, but certainly one that I think afflicts many companies. And I think we've gotten a lot stronger, especially amid the tumult of COVID, which battle tested us. So those are two lessons. There's plenty others, but those two big ones are important.
Yeah, no, those are both fantastic. And yes, I think we probably could take up a whole other hour just talking about lessons learned and imparting your wisdom. I was going to ask a follow-up question, but Randeep, I saw that you raised your hand. So
yeah. So Roman, I think one thing that comes to mind as we are kind of like talking about, the overall, lessons learned. Like you went to Stanford GSB, right? Great business school. Was there something in terms of networking, in terms of some of the classes you took that really helped you, right? Like as far as, obviously every business, and I think when your business requires a network of contacts, I'm sure. And I'm sure your time at KKR and has been helpful as well. So could you just talk about the business school experience? I'm sure will be very relevant to the audience here, right? How was business school networking helpful for you?
Yeah, and I think it maybe even broadening the question to everyday life. What I try to do, and maybe this is unhealthy and I should talk to my therapist about it, but I'm all consumed by Kasa. And I kind of think if you're founding a business, you should be as well, but that's a pretty big commitment, and not everyone with families and other situations can be all consumed. And there's certainly very big sacrifices to that, especially in the context that it may not work. Anything you're building may not work. So being all consumed with something and then it not panning out, you have to be comfortable with that risk. But the broader answer is I try to, in everything that I do, align the surroundings with the top 2-3 goals that increase the chances for Kasa. So I'm always thinking, what are the things that if I solve or help Kasa with today will have the biggest impact on the future of the business? And so that might be mentioning to everyone that I meet, we really need an operations person to do something to help us. Right now, we actually need someone to honor that, who can run a single family homes business within Kasa, like a startup within a startup. It's a very important role. So if you know someone, please send them our way. But within Stanford, that was also the case, right? I think what were the 3 things that when I started Kasa in the second year what are the 3 things I could be working on, whether it's validating product market fit or hiring folks, or maybe some of the legal resources or the product and design or computer science resources that can help Kasa on its journey. And I tried to put myself in positions, classes. I took Startup Garage, which DoorDash was in, and a bunch of others that, and professors even, that I thought increased the chances of success. In my first year, it was more of a discovery effort. And so I was trying to figure out what is the intersection of my passion, purpose, and value. And I looked to mentors, people who've built companies in the past. I also wasn't sure I was going to wanted to start a company. So I looked to people who had gone to school, who had similar backgrounds or even different backgrounds, and how they navigated their thinking, went on long bike rides, and actually made a list of different potential companies and opportunities, and interviewed as many founders that would talk to me and people within those companies outside of the founding team to see what really stood out. And so I don't know if those are helpful, but hopefully more doesn't just apply to Stanford or business school, can be useful across anything founder does.
So that's great.
I have to ask also, and I apologize if you just mentioned it. You mentioned this class, a famous class at Stanford called the Touchy Feely.
Touchy Feely, yeah.
What is that? We have to spend 10 seconds or 15 seconds, 30 seconds on that.
Touchy Feely is a class that's whose official name is Interpersonal Dynamics. It's a class in which you sit. It's like some describe it as group therapy. You sit in I think a 14-person circle for 3 hours, and there's no agenda. But with one caveat: whenever somebody says something that makes you feel a certain way, you share with them that when you said that, I felt upset or elated, so that people and then that helps build kind of like almost like a pattern matching on how your actions have an impact on others. And often you don't realize in everyday life that what you're worried about, sometimes you're worried about your actions having a certain impact, and actually no one noticed and no one cared. And the thing that you didn't realize had an unintended consequence on others. And you also learn in that class that people come into situations with like a lot on their mind and a lot of background. And you don't realize that until you get to a very safe space where you can talk about those things. And I found it to be a deeply impactful class. The reason I mentioned it as an example of walking out and answering the phone is you're not really supposed to use your phone in the class. So I was like, I had to choose between my guest and the class, and it was a very tough choice. But we needed to give the guest a great experience.
Yeah, absolutely. What a cool class. And I think it's probably pretty apparent that this class is beneficial and teaches you lessons that you can carry into both your personal and professional lives, because those are the things that you talked about are not just applicable in the professional world. I think they help you relate to people around you in your everyday life. Now, of course, for you, it's, double A is important because you're in the business of, very consumer-facing business and consumer-centric business. So I can imagine how that was just simply one of the many things that helped you along your way. And I also love how you mentioned that going on the long bike rides was kind of how you either cleared your head, came up with your ideas, organized yourself. Because again, I was watching the Warner Bros. Discovery Town Hall today, and the new CEO mentioned that his favorite way to kind of do all of what you just described is long walks. So not too different than your long bike rides.
Yeah, I think I don't know if this is true. I'm not a neuroscientist, but I think you can't just go on long walks in isolation or long bike rides. You have to have like really concentrated thinking on something, like focus your energy, and then allow for very like dispersed thinking. And so like focus your energy on something until you can't think about it anymore, and then let yourself not think about it for a weekend or a night's sleep. And I think that helps, that combination helps you find nice ideas. I've at least found for myself.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I realize we're a minute over now, so I don't want, although we could keep going, I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And I do know some people have to leave for class as well. But this was fantastic, Roman. I love that we covered so many more topics than I even expected that we would. And I really appreciate the questions that came in. Your questions were so different than the ones I had on my prepared list, which is why I really love when people feel comfortable enough to kind of, ask face-to-face of our presenters. If anybody didn't get to ask anything, and you're welcome. Thanks, Fez, for the feedback.
Thanks, Fez.
If anybody didn't get to ask anything and you thought about it after the fact, please feel free to email the contact@sociate.io email. And just a couple of housekeeping items. As I mentioned earlier, since this was recorded, the recording should be ready within about 48 to 72 hours. So we'll make sure to share that out with all attendees and also the number of people who signed up who couldn't make it. Roman has also graciously agreed to kind of have us at least just share out his basic contact info, especially if anybody would like to continue any particular conversations or ask a question of him after the fact. So super grateful for that, Roman. I may have a follow-up question or two for you that I didn't get to, but we'll save that for an email. And I guess just Randeep, if there's anything you wanted to mention before we close out, please go for it.
Thank you, Roman, for joining us on this call. Excellent questions and answers from you. And again, for everyone who joined the call, let your friends know about Sociate. We'll hopefully have another event like this coming up in a couple of months, hopefully, and we will be in touch. Thanks, everyone, and have a great evening.
Awesome.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Randeep. Thanks, Marcy. Take care.
Bye-bye.